Another warm welcome, please. We're going to be joined with MFAA CEO Anja Pannek, who will engage in a fireside chat.
Hello everyone. Yes, I am back. Alan, thank you so much. I think this is a very unique and wonderful opportunity to hear directly from our regulator. So I did make a little bit of a quip this morning that knowing that you're presenting, having ASIC in the room makes us sit up a little bit straighter. But I think the flip side to that is it gives us an opportunity to hear directly from you, and that is so key and important. We value the constructive and ongoing dialogue that we have with you and your team and the regulator. You started this morning with, I'm going to say it, some lines, and I want to quote them back because I think they're incredibly powerful and a good reminder for us. With power comes responsibility. That the best interest duty, the mortgage broker best interest duty, is really a blueprint for building trust. And a good professional tells you what you need to know, not what you want to know. Now, I know that you can't actually talk in detail about the findings because your team are still working through it. What can we expect in terms of timing around the mortgage broker best interest duty? And in your mind, what does that look like in terms of providing clarity to our members and the broader industry?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that some more. I mean, I can give people also a sense of, I guess, what we've done in that review, which gives you a sense of, what's likely to come out of it, or I guess the basis on which we'll make observations. So we have focused on large aggregators and sort of had two phases. The first one was gathering a bunch of data to help us understand loan flows, things like commission and clawback rates. That was just sort of to help us get an understanding of issues that we might want to look into a little bit more. We've then moved on to look at compliance processes and sort of oversight, the way in which aggregators are overseeing issues in relation to the best interest duty, and in particular having a deeper dive on complaints, as I mentioned in the speech. So it's sort of two phases that have given us some quite rich data. We expect to have a report out in the final quarter of this calendar year, so before the end of the year. And typically what we do with those reports, there are some others that we've done relevant to the sector in the past that you would have seen, but generally what we'll try and do is be clear about the legal obligations that we're looking at. We'll lay out our methodology, what we've observed, and what we ideally hope to be able to do is identify a range of practices. So we can say, here are some better practices we identified that we think demonstrate strong compliance with the law. Here are some that raise questions or concern for us. And that's really to help people to sort of benchmark your own practice against what we've seen and identify where you might be able to make improvements. And sometimes we'll also have sort of industry-wide recommendations for areas where we think people can improve practice.
I think that's that is actually key. The way that the MFAA, my team and I have stepped into the engagement and working alongside aggregators, your aggregators, and with ASIC as well, as this does provide us with a huge opportunity to lift the bar. And the whole theme of today's conference is around built on trust and ready for tomorrow. And your line, with power comes responsibility. I don't think we, as an industry, we can rest on, dare I say, laurels. I sound like my mum when I say that, don't I? We can't rest on our laurels. It's a good opportunity to face into all of that. So I sort of heard sort of three themes when you spoke about best interest duty. It'd be good to hear you unpack those a little, like, it's acting in your individual client's best interest as required by the law. It's the documentation and it's how you handle things when they don't go according to plan, and sometimes they don't. Could you just unpack that a little bit further for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people to sort of understand where we're coming from, it'd be useful to have a look at some of the reports we put out on financial advice, which we've done many more times. So that's a sector where we've gone in and done these thematic reviews many more times than we have in relation to broking. And obviously, there's the best interest duty there. It's not framed in the same way. It's a lot more detailed. So it's just a broad analogy, I guess. But we have typically sort of gone, what we do is in those reviews, we'll often go in and ask for advisors and licensees to provide us with a sample of files, and we'll go through the files. And what we're looking for is documentary evidence about how you've gone through the steps that are required to satisfy the duty. So that's kind of, I guess, a reference point for some of those comments in my speech. What we're looking for is an appropriate level of evidence about the steps that you've gone through to understand the client's needs and objectives, to to assess them against the relevant offers available in the market, what recommendations you made to the client, and how you've supported them to make an ultimate decision. So obviously when it comes to financial advice, there's probably a higher bar in terms of the levels of documentation, but it is still important in relation to broking that if we come asking, whether that's part of a thematic review or because concerns have been flagged about a particular individual or licensee, that you can provide that sort of evidence.
Mm-hmm. So on when things don't go right in complaints, I'm putting you on the spot here, and so apologies. Are there sort of key themes that ASIC have noticed through that review of complaints that you spoke about? And I'm putting you on the spot, so I do apologise a little. So
yeah,
if there's anything you could share with us.
It is too early to say in relation to that review. I mean, I think one of the things I would flag, and this isn't, just to be clear, this isn't grounded in the particular review, but a general theme that we would say to anybody across the financial services industry, just make sure you've got the right processes and systems for identifying what is a complaint. So we've done some work in other areas. We have actually found a big gap between I guess the rate at which consumers were really clearly expressing dissatisfaction and the rate at which they were formally identified as complaints. And as I said in the speech, that's important, because if you identify something as a complaint, you give a response to the consumer under your IDR process. They then are notified they've got the right to go to AFCA if they want to. So there are some important sort of rights that are triggered. So that is one of the threshold issues for anybody, we would say, is just make sure you've got those processes right, because if you're failing at that first stage, then the IDR process and the EDR process don't work. And again, this is not specific to broking, but we're in other areas where we've seen serious failures to identify complaints and handle them under the enforceable requirements of RG 271. We have taken formal action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and absolutely, and we've seen that. What I might do now is sort of change tack to something which has been a very big topic, and thank you for touching on it in your speech, which is fraud. So the MFAA has established we're calling it our referrer working group, where we're looking at fraud, and what we recognise is fraud. No one wants it in our industry, but the reality is it comes in, and it is everyone's responsibility. How do you see the roles of the mortgage broker, aggregators, licensees and lenders? How do you see that in terms of responsibility when it comes to tackling fraud?
I think everybody's got a responsibility from their unique perspective and role in the process to be looking for examples of any sort of misconduct, but particularly involving fraud is probably the most serious form of misconduct, and to be reporting it appropriately. So if you're a broker, the first port of call should be to report it to your licensee, but you may also consider reporting it to ASIC. If you're a licensee, you've got clear obligations to report it to us, whether it involves somebody operating under your licence or another licensee's licence. So it's important for everybody to be on alert. And I guess, those well-reported circumstances of large-scale mortgage fraud, that's a really particular type of conduct. And I imagine most people in the room would think, well, that's not something that I would ever expect to come across. But I guess it's worth just thinking about the role everybody has to try to stop that, or at least detect it early. Because I think as those sorts of processes unfold, if you do end up with prosecutions, major court action, then the impression that's left with the public is that it's a much simpler message, is that there are brokers involved in fraud, and that's where it can actually have an impact on reputation and trust for everybody in this industry, including people that don't deserve to be associated with that. So that's why that it's really in everyone's interest to be looking out and reporting earlier, because the earlier that we can get onto something, whether it's us or AUSTRAC or the AFP or APRA, and intervene, then the less big it's likely to become, and the less likely that it will be to have that sort of significant impact on trust.
I think, very wise words. We've spoken a lot today around trust. AI is a big topic of conversation. AI is going to introduce huge opportunities for our members and industry. We see it happening already, but I think the flip side to that is the dark side of AI and the evil side of AI, if I could sort of quip about that, which, the risks associated in and around lending and how cyber is evolving are becoming a lot more sophisticated. So it's introducing risks as well. We know that there is no clear regulation around AI here in this country. It's very different to other jurisdictions, for example, in the EU, but there are very robust regulatory frameworks for mortgage brokers, privacy, responsible lending, all the rest. So how do you think about AI through the lens of brokers, cybersecurity, scams? And I know scams is a massive area of focus across the financial services sector, but think about cyber, privacy, data, and the opportunity versus the risk for our members.
Yeah, I mean, we are focused a lot on both sides of that equation, both the opportunity and the risk. I mean, to be clear, we think AI's got enormous potential to produce better consumer outcomes, to make it more efficient to deliver services, to give more personalised services, a better overall consumer experience. But obviously there are risks as well. So I might talk about it initially in relation to using it in consumer-facing applications and then a little bit on cyber. In terms of using it, I guess, in service delivery, as you said, there are robust frameworks in place, and the government's approach generally in Australia is to say, well, let's look at where existing law can pull its weight before we think about whether there need to be any special AI laws. And so those core obligations as a licensee, the best interest duty, the obligation to have appropriate risk management and compliance systems, adequate resources to ensure that services are delivered efficiently, honestly and fairly, all of those can apply to the use of AI. So you can't outsource your core obligations to an AI tool. So by all means, if you're using it, you need to be really clear about how it's working. You need to be asking the vendors or the people that are supporting you to introduce those tools exactly how it works, how the algorithms work, what factors will feed into recommendations if that's what it's providing, how they might change over time if it's a tool that will learn, because you need to understand where the risk is in that for you. And then the important part of it is to have appropriate monitoring in place. So I talked about the importance of metrics and data. That's additionally important in relation to AI because the way in which those tools work over time can evolve. So you've got to have the right data measurement in place to identify if it's starting to produce different outcomes in a way that raises a concern. And then I guess on the other side of risk, in relation to cyber, I know there was a panel just before lunch that Tara from ASIC was on, but the key thing there is that particularly the frontier AI models are just fundamentally changing cyber risks. So the fact that there are these new models that can find vulnerabilities in widely used software that have been there for years but no human has ever picked up, like that is really scary. And so you need to, whatever your role in the system, just have a sense of where your key data assets are, what are the core systems. You need to make sure there's frequent patching happening. So if you're responsible for applying software patches, make sure that happens frequently. If others are providing services to you, be asking them about their frequency of patching, because it is clear that people need to be patching a lot more frequently than we probably thought 6 months ago. And then finally, know what you'll do if something goes wrong. I mean, I think across any industry in Australia where we've seen big cyber breaches, there's been some damage that's occurred through the result of, say, consumer data being exposed. But I would argue there's been some damage as a result of poor responses, poor communications with customers. So you've got to be ready to go, be clear about who will be your decision makers, who do you need to communicate with, how do you get hands on that information, what systems are you going to use, even have templates used for how you might communicate with people, because, if you find yourself in the middle of a cyber breach, it's sort of unfolding before you. It can be a lot to think through if you haven't done any of that preparation in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually an exercise that we've done as an organisation at the MFAA. So the other thing the MFAA has established very recently is a cyber resilience forum comprised of CROs and CTOs from major aggregator groups and major service suppliers across industry. Because frontier AI, I didn't know what frontier AI was until we were copied in on Simone Constant's letter around the importance of some of the fundamentals. I think the second thing is cyber wardens. If you have not done cyber wardens, which is a COSBOA program, and you are a broker, do it. It is absolutely priceless and a great initiative to uplift cyber resilience in a way that's very accessible. So now I'm very conscious of your time. I know we spoke about, you've got a very busy afternoon, Alan. I guess maybe to close us, obviously the broker industry is a very big player in some of the most important financial decisions that Australians make. What would be one key thing that you would want as ASIC to really see our industry and our growing profession to focus on?
I think if there's an overarching theme, it's really about getting the basics right. So making sure you've got the right systems to govern the provision of services in line with obligations, making sure you've got robust complaints handling processes so that people get appropriate responses if something goes wrong, and focusing on those key risks, particularly in areas of cyber. So getting the basics right.
Thank you. Everyone, please join me in thanking Commissioner Alan Kirkland for joining us this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.